host, assistant editor Vincent Verhei. Joining me, as always, football outsiders editor-in-chief Aaron Schatz and contributing writer Bryan Knowles. We are here as we are every week to discuss the stats and news and info going on in the NFL this week. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Good. It's trade deadline day. I'm excited. Woo! Bring on the trades.
Always fun to be doing a live show while breaking news is actively breaking.
News has broken. Broken news has broken us a little bit. Before we get into that, I do want to mention real quick our good buddies at Underdog Fantasy, because you, the listener, can play on Underdog Fantasy with us and double your first deposit up to $100 with promo code OUTSIDERS. Are your season-long fantasy teams floundering? Play Underdog's Battle Royale, a fast 6-round weekly fantasy football draft with easier chances to win than traditional daily fantasy sports sites. You can even win $50,000 if you grab first place. Or try their pick'em games where you can easily pick players' chances to go higher or lower than their projected stat lines, even in states where traditional prop betting currently isn't available. Underdog is the fastest growing fantasy site around. Join the fun over at underdogfantasy.com or download Underdog in the App Store and use promo code OUTSIDERS now to double your first deposit up to $100. So thank you, as always, to the fine folks at Underdog Fantasy. And speaking of underdogs, the Detroit Lions. I was really high on this team like 6 weeks ago. It has not gone well since then. And they made an interesting trade just like 20 minutes before we went on the air here. TJ Hockenson, their tight end, their leading receiver in by yardage anyway, they have traded him to the Minnesota Vikings.
In division
to the division leaders.
For basically to move up in 2 rounds.
Yeah.
They will move 2 4th-round picks and turn them into a 2nd and a 3rd. They're not gaining any picks.
No. They're
just moving up.
I will let somebody else break out the trade point value chart, but they're getting a 2nd and a 3rd back. But they're going to be, late round, mid to late round, 2nd and 3rd round picks for some very early 4th round picks. A 2023 4th round pick that we know is going to be early, a 2024 4th round pick, which it's the Lions. That'll probably be early too. So they're not getting a ton back. They're giving up the leading receiver. He's young. He's talented. He's one of what you thought was one of the few building blocks around, and he's gone now.
To give a little bit more context, maybe to try to explain this from the Lions' point of view, Hockenson's 5th-year deal is coming up. He's going to be due for an extension very soon. So if you're the Lions and you think you're not going to be competitive for the next 2 years, this is probably a good time to get rid of him, because if you're going to start from scratch again. But how can you start from scratch again if you're the Lions, right? I mean, this is... at some point, you have to stop rebuilding and start being a thing. And the Lions can't keep going, oh, well, we'll be good eventually. We're good eventually, and keep stockpiling things. The more I look at this deal, the more I hate it for the Lions. Last week, I was like, oh, don't worry, Dan Campbell is not on the hot seat. Everything will be fine. And since then, they've fired the defensive backs coach and traded away their top tight end. So I might have to slightly adjust my priors on that one.
Yeah, I'm a believer in it's good to have some good veteran receivers for a young quarterback. And let's be honest, Detroit is now going to be in line to draft a top quarterback in this next draft. And what is the young quarterback's best friend? It's the tight end, man. So even if they were only going to have Hockenson for 1 more year, it might have been worth it just for the development of the young quarterback that they're going to take in next year's draft. Because of the fact that this isn't actually giving them any more picks, it's just moving them up in 2 rounds. For the Vikings, I love it. Because, we can talk all day about the Vikings being they're the 3rd worst 6-1 team ever by DVOA. But they're in the mix, right? And, other than the Eagles, nobody is really standing out in the NFC. So go out and fill a hole. Irv Smith got injured. He wasn't playing very well anyway. He was last among all tight ends in DYAR. So fill a hole, get a player. It sounds like it's a great deal for the Vikings. But for the Lions, I understand the need to rebuild. And if they're not going to re-sign Hockenson, then they might as well get something for him. But I just don't think they're getting that much, and that he had use staying on the team.
Yeah, the only way I'm trying to figure out if this makes any sense for Detroit is if they have already identified a quarterback for next year that they want to be number one. I want to make sure they get that guy, but they're already right now in the number 2 draft slot, only a half game ahead of Houston, so they could probably get their guy anyway. I don't get this. I'm baffled. I don't understand this one bit. And for Minnesota, like you say, it makes total sense. They already have a strong lead in the division. If Philadelphia slips up somewhere, the Vikings are going to be a team that gets that bye probably. So hey, yeah, this is what we want teams to do. Is we want teams to follow the Rams model and be aggressive and strike while the iron's hot and every other cliche you can think of. But I'm kind of gobsmacked, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And I've seen some of the immediate reaction from Lions Twitters that, oh, Hockenson was a bust for his draft position anyway. Well, it wasn't Hockenson's fault that the Lions used a top 10 pick on a tight end. You know, that's never a great plan.
You don't trade guys based on how well they did compared to their draft position. Once you've drafted them, their draft position is, it helps tell you something about their potential, but by the time you get to year 4, draft position is sort of meaningless. He is what he is. Doesn't matter that he was a bust for his draft position.
Well, with that little bit out of the side. By the way, if you're listening live, you can join us here on Restream. Share your questions and comments. We'll try to get to some of those. If any of you like or love this move, let us know. We'll try to get some other opinions on there. But moving on, well, here's one right away. Old Heedy 403. Vikings are my dark horse team to win it all. I like it even more now. They're still an awfully dark horse. They're not.
By play, they're an average team.
Yeah, but like I say, there's an opportunity to be had here, and they're reaching for that. So I applaud them for that. But moving on to the teams we thought we were going to talk about today, and that is some of these favorite teams: the Philadelphia Eagles, the Buffalo Bills, the top teams in each conference. And after a pair of dominant wins on Sunday, or at least what felt like dominant wins, the Eagles have actually gained ground on the Buffalo Bills. Aaron, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on here with the DVOA?
Gained a lot of ground. Yeah. So the Eagles had the second best individual game of the year so far. The only game that comes out with a better rating is Kansas City's win over San Francisco 2 weeks ago. But this now comes out as a better win for the Eagles than the Jacksonville shutout of Indianapolis back in week 2, which was our number 1 game for a while. And meanwhile, in the Buffalo-Green Bay game, Green Bay ended up with a much higher DVOA than the Bills did, which is, I know, a shock. It was the Bills' worst offensive game of the season and their second worst defensive game of the season, because the Packers just kept running consistent runs on them, and then Josh Allen threw 2 picks. The problem is Josh Allen threw 2 picks in the fourth quarter with a big lead. So now we get into the argument we always have about DVOA, which is, does it do enough to lower the importance of the plays when one team has a big lead over the other team in the fourth quarter?
It's always hard to answer because there's no strict definition of what is garbage time. But I was watching that game, and the Bills. Let's see, the biggest lead they had was 24-7, and that was at halftime actually. And the Packers started chipping away, and what should have been a really easy win for Buffalo, they had to watch as Green Bay missed a field goal. Had that kick been good, the Packers would have had a chance for an onside kick. This game was not 100% for Buffalo. So, I mean, it was garbage time, but it wasn't, completely out of reach. And so I think it's fair to say, look, they turned what should have been a really easy win into still an easy win, but not as easy as it should have been. It's significant.
Yeah, when you allow 200 yards rushing and lose the turnover battle, you don't win many of those football games. And I think it's totally valid to say that, the Bills do that repeatedly over the course of the season. They're going to lose more of those games than they win. Part of the problem with the Packers is that they didn't seem to have much urgency for much of the second half of that game. If they had been going faster, because in the fourth quarter, once they started getting some deep shots to make sense of the run game, like things started happening. If they had started doing that like 15 minutes into the game, we might be talking about, oh wow, the Bills got upset in this huge game. Instead, it's the Bills might have gotten upset if that game had gone on for 2 or 3 more quarters.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Bills are now minus 42% DVOA when they're up in the fourth quarter by more than 8 points, right? The league average is minus 1.3%. So basically close to zero, which is what it's supposed to be. And the Chiefs, who are known as for taking their foot off the gas, actually have a positive 13% DVOA with a big lead in the fourth quarter. So it's not like every team, or even teams that are known for taking their foot off the gas, is bad with a big lead in the fourth quarter. So here is the thing that I'm writing about for the DVOA commentary today. What if we took out all plays with a 2-possession lead in the fourth quarter and didn't count them at all? So the Bills would be better, but so would the Eagles. So the gap between the Bills and the Eagles is actually smaller if you take out all those plays. Both teams would look better if you took out plays in the fourth quarter with a lead of more than 1 possession, because the Bills' defense is fine. The Bills' defense is not worse when they have a late lead. They're fine when they have a late lead, while the Eagles' defense is worse with a late lead, and their offense is worse with a late lead. So the other thing is, can you guess which offense in the league was the best in 2021 with a fourth quarter lead of more than 8 points?
Is it going to be the Bills? We're doing that the narrative
We're
story here?
talking about the Buffalo Bills.
Okay.
So, of course, the answer is yes, the Buffalo Bills. If we took out those plays, last year's Bills would not have rated as highly. And by the way, also last year's Chiefs would not have rated as highly. And last year's Cincinnati Bengals would not have rated as highly. And I don't think what we want to do is do something that makes last year's Chiefs, Bengals, and Bills look worse.
Plus, you can make an argument that, when you're up 2 scores, maybe your goal as a team is not to have the most efficient plays, but like use clock and stuff like that. Well, nowhere in the strategy is, we're going to throw some interceptions. That's going to be
right. Yes, there's definitely an argument that I do not do enough in DVOA to account for the value of using clock. But the Bills didn't use clock. The Packers were running the ball and using clock. And the Bills were taking chances and throwing interceptions up 17 points. It was strange.
It's a very, very weird game. It hadn't actually occurred to me until Mike Tenier wrote about it and either walked through the DVOA preview when he's talking about, yes, the trailing team is rallying with a powerful run game, and the team with the big lead is throwing really dumb interceptions too. Something I've heard forever.
Including one on the 3.
Yeah, when you're ahead, field goals are very good.
I, for one, enjoyed Josh Allen's Halloween costume of rookie Josh Allen. I think that was a very nice throwback for a seasonally appropriate weekend.
Yeah. There's still once a year when rookie Josh Allen shows up. Last year was the loss against Jacksonville. This year it may have just been the fourth quarter of this game, and unfortunately it came then. But yeah, once in a while you cover your eyes and say, "What are you doing, Josh?"
I know that we are kind of alone out there in having the Bills and Eagles very close together. But I feel kind of good about it. Like, I do feel like the Bills are the best team in the league. It's not that I think the Bills are overrated. They're a little overrated because people are acting like they're a historically great team, when in reality what they are is, this is how good the best team usually is.
Right.
Usually the best team is this good. And guess what? This year, the best team is also this good. I think the Eagles are closer to the Bills than we're giving them credit for.
And it is strange because usually when this happens, when we argue a team is underrated, it's like a team has a really high DVOA, but they're like 4-3.
Yeah, like
the Eagles like an underrated, undefeated team, which I don't recall seeing before. Let's talk about these Eagles. Oh, go ahead.
I think they're being dragged down a little bit by the perception of the NFC as being the significantly worse conference and all the struggles underneath. Like, of course the Eagles are undefeated. They're playing the NFC. Yeah, they're crushing the NFC. That helps.
And they stopped an AFC team this week. So let's get into these Eagles a little bit here. We talked about the Bills some. Let's talk about this Eagles win over Pittsburgh. Brian, do you have any notes on A.J. Brown, the difference he's made for Philadelphia this year, and especially on Sunday?
This Sunday was AJ Brown's biggest impact on the Eagles offense so far. He caught 3 touchdowns on go routes in the first half. In the history of next gen stats charting, he's the first player ever to have 3 touchdowns on go routes in the same game, and he did it in 30 minutes. There's a lot to be said for scheme and design. There's also a lot to be said that you are really good, run really fast that way, and we're going to chuck the ball in your direction. Jalen Hurts threw 4 touchdowns of 25 yards or more on Sunday. The record in one game is 5 by Dan Marino in 1994. So that's pretty good company he's keeping there. And this is really interesting because you would expect with AJ Brown to be more deep shots, but that's been the opposite of the case for the Eagles this year. Hurts's average depth of target has dropped from over 9 yards in 2020 and 2021 down to just 7.3 this season. The Eagles were 28th in the number of targets, deep targets leading in. And this week they said, oh, you know what? We just traded for this expensive receiver. What if we just send him downfield a lot? And it worked out. And I hope to see more of that in weeks to come.
So I ran a bunch of numbers because of Philadelphia playing Houston this week, which is, first of all, it's great because the Philadelphia and Houston are going to play in the World Series and in the NFL on the same day because of a rain.
Oh, wow.
And so the NFL stats put up a stat that this has apparently happened 7 different times. Although to say 7 different times, you have to say things like the 49ers and the Oakland A's are in the same region.
Which work everywhere except for San Francisco and Oakland.
Right. San Francisco and Oakland would argue with you about that. But, most of those games I think were Sundays, not Thursdays. So I wanted to know, because Houston is 32nd, right? So, is this the biggest mismatch in DVOA history? And the answer is, this is not even close to the biggest mismatch in DVOA history. The biggest mismatch in DVOA history was in 1993 between San Francisco and Tampa Bay, when Tampa Bay was last at minus 60% or something. And games between a top 3 team and a bottom 3 team happen roughly 4 times a year or so. In fact, there were 4 of them last year. Arizona against Houston, where Arizona was favored by 18 points in week 7 and won 31-5. So they covered 18. And then a Rams-Houston game the next week where the Rams were favored by 16 and won by 16 when the Texans scored 22 points all in the fourth quarter. That is a backdoor cover to be remembered. And then week 13, Tampa Bay, Atlanta, and week 17, Buffalo, Atlanta, which was the only one of these games where the underdog actually covered because Buffalo was favored by 14.5 and only won by 14. Bill Houston, by the way, wants to know about the Seahawks. We're going to actually get to the Seahawks with our next segment. But before that, I wanted to bring up a graphic because it's actually time to start talking about the Philadelphia Eagles and an undefeated season. Their odds of going undefeated passed 5% this week, 1 in 20. Their schedule is so easy. I mean, it's not entirely easy. Tennessee might be an interesting matchup, and Green Bay might be an interesting matchup, and they have to play the Giants twice. And at Dallas is by far their hardest remaining game is at Dallas on Christmas. But I made a graphic of Philadelphia's odds of going undefeated through each week of the season based on our playoff odds report simulation. So it's 77% that they'll go 8-0, 65% that they'll go 9-0, and so on and so forth. And you can see from the fact that their odds drop by more than half when they play Dallas on Christmas, that's their hardest game. That's the one game where they wouldn't be favored right now. And then it ends at 5.6%, although actually I wrote this up yesterday. Today's simulation has it at 5.8%. That the Eagles go undefeated. But because their schedule is so easy, it's actually time to start thinking about this as a possibility of a thing that might happen.
A long shot still to be sure, but I mean they're in a fantastic position.
Yeah.
Sirianni has done a fantastic job with them this year. Jalen Hurts, Jalen Hurts has made a pretty significant jump here between year 2 and year 3.
Yeah, I don't think Hurts is a serious MVP candidate, in part because I think that the narrative that people will vote on is much more Hurts helped by coaching and the addition of A.J. Brown, whereas I think Allen and Mahomes are seen as doing it much more on their own. But Hurts is playing very, very well.
At the moment, or at least as of yesterday, Hurts was actually leading the betting odds for Offensive Player of the Year, which would be like, well, we got to give Allen the MVP, but we got to award Hurts with something, so something else.
I still don't see it. Yeah. I feel like people have gotten to the point where Offensive Player of the Year is the non-quarterback award.
And I agree with that in general, but I'm just saying that people, at least the betting public wants to give Hurts something, but they feel like they can't give him MVP because the other guys are better.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I just want to talk about Brian's note there about A.J. Brown catching all those go route touchdowns. I didn't have this game on Sunday. I just was watching other things. I figured the Eagles were going to blow out Pittsburgh. I was not high on my list, and I was right about that. But so the highlights keep coming up, and they're showing the highlights of Eagles touchdowns, and I kept thinking, oh, I've seen this one already. Wait, no, that's new. That is not the exact same play. It just looks exactly the same. So that was a strange experience, but yeah, they're doing very well. So I think now we'll move on to the Seattle Seahawks and the 49ers in the NFC West. And Aaron, you mentioned this question. It's from Bill Houston. What's going on with the Seahawks FO? Oh, us, Football Outsiders. Do the 49ers catch them? Has Carroll proved to Vince he can build a team? It's funny. After the game, Pete Carroll did a little ranting after the Giants win. And noting, I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have it in front of me, but he said, everyone who thinks that the game has passed me by or I run too much or anything like that, that's a load of crap, he said. And I know I was not the only one to say things along those lines, but I felt like he was directing me personally. May as well call me out by name. So
he does know us. I mean, he knows our stuff. He's talked about DVOA in the past.
Yes.
I mean, we're going to have to give him a mea culpa.
We were wrong about a lot of things, but at the same time, he has also changed a lot of things.
That's also true.
They're passing more early and downs than they ever have before. And one of the things we said was he seems to be building a team around the run when passing is what wins. Well, his team is really, really good at passing, and they're really, really good lately at defending the pass. So,
right. He's kind of moved towards us. I think he's even being a little bit more aggressive on fourth downs.
A little bit. I mean, I know I've said this lots of places, but he had a touchdown this week where he went for it on fourth and short twice in the same drive. And it's usually at midfield where he's conservative because he loves punting. And I think in the red zone he's willing to go for it because if he doesn't get it, it pins the opponent deep, and that's what he loves to do anyway. So
the mea culpa, I think, the biggest mea culpa is if he truly identified that Geno Smith could be this good, and I don't know whether he did. It's possible he stumbled into this just like we all have. But if he did truly identify that Geno Smith could be this good, and it was part of the thought process behind trading Russell Wilson, and Geno Smith, it was never going to be Drew Lock. It was going to be Geno Smith. If that is the case, huge mea culpa. That is incredible talent identification.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that he thought that Geno Smith would be at least an average starter. I would be stunned if he thought he was going to be the top 10, top 5, top whatever you want to give that Smith has actually been through a half a season.
There's barely any precedent for anything like this. I was thinking about writing about Geno Smith and quick reads and realized I already did earlier this year. But I was looking for how late it took for any specific quarterback to have a positive DR season. This is going to be Geno Smith's first year above 0 DR ever. And it's year 10, I think. And the only guy I could find who took longer was Doug Flutie, who spent a decade in Canada winning championship after championship there. So as far as a backup, playing like a backup and deserving to be a backup for so long and then suddenly becoming not even good, above becoming mediocre, it hasn't happened. There's no record for it in the past 40 years.
The only similar guy I can think of might be Rich Gannon. except Rich Gannon was not a first-round pick. Smith was a first-round pick, or he was an early second round?
Early second round. Yeah.
It was early second round. But Gannon was like a fifth or a sixth-round pick who had played numerous positions, and people talked about changing his position in the NFL, and then he went from team to team until he went to Kansas City, and finally kind of it snapped into place for him, and then he went to Oakland after that, and then he was an MVP candidate. Actually was an MVP, I think, in 2002. The only other thing I can think about is guys from before Football Outsider stats exist.
Yeah.
Like
some people have suggested Steve Young because he was bad with Tampa Bay for a year or two and then had to sit, for a while. That doesn't really work.
Steve Young was sort of a really hard comparison because he had played USFL first, and he had played really well in the USFL, so we knew he could play well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is stunning for Geno.
If people bring up Gannon, it's interesting. He was bad for most of his early years. He was in 1991 with Minnesota, 488 DYAR. He was 13th there, 11th in DVOA. So he'd had a good year before. And then, as you noted, a couple of decent years in Kansas City, and then MVP with Oakland in early 2000s, whichever year that was. So that was, it's hard to find comps for Geno Smith, so the Gannon is probably as close as
Testaverde is an interesting one. Testaverde is an interesting one because he was horrible at first, and then by the time he got to like Baltimore in '96, he was great.
Yeah, but the difference there, I don't know if Testaverde had any good years early, but Gannon had shown flashes of competency, and the growth was more gradual. Smith was never any good, disappeared. A lot of people probably forgot he was in the league. And has come out this year and has played at a Pro Bowl level. And it's very, very hard, especially a quarterback, to find a comp anything like that. The other thing we're talking about here, and we're talking a lot about Geno Smith for obvious reasons, and we talked a lot about Pete Carroll because he's so charismatic and such a figurehead, and it's his team when you think about the Seahawks. But the guy who I think there's a ton of credit, and he works closely with Carroll, but it's John Schneider, who has had, after not a lot of good off seasons lately, everything he touched this year turned to gold. The Russell Wilson trade appears to have been selling high at the exact right time. Got a ton out of it, even though Drew Lock's not playing, but Noah Fant's one of their trio of tight ends, and Shelby Harris is making plays. And then he took all those draft picks, and he appears to have found 5 good starters in the same draft, which doesn't happen very often at all. You got to go back to like that New Orleans draft with Marshawn Lattimore and all them. So, the Seahawks have 2 good rookie corners starting. They have 2 good offensive tackles starting that are rookies. And, of course, Kenneth Walker, your current Rookie of the Year favorite. So the draft was a home run. The trade was a home run. It's hard to find any move that Seattle made over this past offseason that could have gone any better. And so just keep John Schneider in mind when it's time to do the awards voting for Best Executive of the Year.
Absolutely. And then it's nice that Seattle's defense has gotten better and better over the last few weeks, because over the first 3 weeks, Seattle's defense was okay.
It was terrible.
It was terrible. It was 30th in the league through the first 5 weeks, and number 1 over the last 3 weeks.
It's been a turnaround as rookies have developed and guys have gotten used to their position, and they've managed to change to a 3-4 front after an entire decade of being a 4-3 team. So that probably had some growing pains with that too. But everything is going well. So we're coming off this week here where the 2 biggest games in the week were 49ers and Rams, because I don't want to say it was loser out.
But it was the most important game for the playoff odds.
Yeah. And the Seahawks and Giants game, the only game of the week between 2 teams with winning records. And what's funny is, if you look at playoff odds now, I believe the Seahawks and Giants is a likely first-round playoff rematch. So that they may meet again down the road. And as Brian notes here, it's like the early 2010s, the 49ers and Seahawks on top in the NFC West.
Yeah, it's pretty much our playoff odds pretty much have it as a dead heat. Bill Houston asked if the Niners are going to catch them. Right now, our odds have Seattle at about a 47% chance to win the division, and the Niners at about a 42% chance to win the division. Both of them are both the Niners and the Seahawks are top 10 in DVOA. They're top 10 in weighted DVOA. They're top 10 in Dave. They're very, very close to one another. Seattle is currently a little bit better in both DVOA and weighted DVOA. The Niners are still a little higher in Dave because we thought the Seahawks were going to be terrible. So it's close to a dead heat at this point in time. And then, as always, when the Niners were struggling a little bit after 2 weeks ago getting blown out by the Chiefs, they got to do what the Niners always get to do when they need something to go right, and that's get to play the Los Angeles Rams. They have now won.
It's really amazing, by the way. It's really amazing that the Niners lost to the Rams in the playoffs last year.
Yeah.
Because in the regular season, they owned them.
8 straight regular season wins against the Rams for the 49ers. This is despite being underdogs in 6 of those 8 games. And they've covered the spread in 7 of the 8 games. 21% of Kyle Shanahan's career wins have come against the Los Angeles Rams. If he was just average against them, I don't think he has a head coaching job anymore. But he just crushes the Rams year after year after year.
It's there's a lot going right in San Francisco right now too. Everyone I think now knows about Christian McCaffrey and the triple crown he had with the rushing, passing, receiving touchdown in the same game.
I love this stat. Christian McCaffrey completed his first. Christian McCaffrey. It's the first deep throw touchdown the Niners have had this year. The first one of over 15 yards.
That's fantastic.
Jimmy Garoppolo completed his first pass as a 49er of 30-plus air yards outside the numbers against the Rams. This was his 52nd game with the 49ers. Christian McCaffrey also completed his first pass as a 49er, 30 more yards downfield outside the numbers. It's his second game with the 49ers, and he's a running back. We all said, oh, this is so much to give for Christian McCaffrey. Is it that much to give for your new QB1?
Yeah. Franchise quarterback. We're in single wing.
I swear, I'm looking forward to next season, which you put Christian McCaffrey and Trey Lance and Deebo Samuel and Kyle Juszczyk in the same backfield and just challenge defenses to guess who's going to get the ball because any of them can do anything at any given time.
It'll be like the A11.
Yes. It'll be the A formation from the 1940s. They just all kinds of old single wing and Notre Dame box formations. Get out there, be creative.
And as the quick reads writer who has to categorize all this stuff and adjust things like when receivers catch passes or receivers throw passes or quarterbacks catch them, it's going to be a pain in my ass.
I don't think Kyle Shanahan wants to coach. He just wants to draw up plays, and that's why you'd give up so much for Christian McCaffrey. It's a new toy for him to use. He told the story about how he was calling on Thursday, asking people around, does anyone know if Christian McCaffrey can throw? And they had to dig up old Carolina footage of him doing a 50-yard pass in 2018.
I've got a breaking news, guys.
Uh-oh.
And this one is weird.
Oh, okay.
Chase Claypool to the Bears.
Pardon?
Didn't the Bears just trade some guy away because they're...
Yeah, I guess the idea is we all said over and over again that the Bears need better receivers to figure out whether Fields is any good. So they went out and got one. No word yet on what the compensation is. But
they just waited until November to do it.
They needed they needed a good wide receiver so they could figure out if Justin Fields is the man or not. And they went out and got one.
And they have generated a lot of value in draft picks and cap space. And I guess they're starting it now. You're using it now rather than waiting for the offseason.
I think Claypool has 2 more years, this year and next.
He's only 24. Yeah, it depends on what they paid for it, but on paper, this makes sense to me if you think that Justin Fields has played better in recent weeks, and he has. And you, like you say, they desperately needed a good young wide receiver. I don't think Claypool's necessarily a long-term WR1 or anything, but he's better than most of what the Bears have, and like you say, he's young, he can grow with the quarterback, and we'll see when the details come in. But I get this.
Claypool has 1 year left on his deal, but the Bears have $121 million in cap space for next year, so that won't be a problem.
If they believe in him, they can sign him long term.
Yes. Yeah, they believe in anyone they can sign him long term. They have all the money.
I don't worry too much about how are we going to pay this good young player. I'm more concerned about getting the good young player and then finding money for him.
The Bears are trading a 2nd-round pick per Adam Schefter for Chase Claypool.
A 2nd-round pick?
That's what I'm told.
That is
that's more than I would
a
have guessed.
lot. That's higher than Claypool's actual draft position.
It will be if the Bears keep it that low. Yeah.
Claypool was a third. He was a 3rd rounder.
Just had it open. You're probably right, but
Sleepy Time Junction wants to know if Claypool is a better wide receiver than Darryl Mooney. I honestly do not know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I will let we get Derek.
It is hard to determine, given the quarterbacks that each one has. It's kind of hard to determine how good each of them really is, but especially because that Steelers offense is so much short stuff, and Claypool's really. When is he as a rookie? He was good at like deep 50-50 balls, and now there are no deep 50-50 balls.
Yeah. Chase Claypool, 49th overall, 2nd round in 2020.
He was a 2nd-round pick. Okay.
Yeah, late second, 49th. That's probably not going to be far off from this pick that the Steelers getting back from the Bears. Maybe a little bit earlier.
But it says here that it might be Baltimore's 2nd-round pick.
Exactly. They just got that 2 days ago for Roquan Smith. Yeah.
That'll probably run around 49.
I don't know if I do that. If I'm them.
Well, I'm certainly more comfortable doing it if it's the.
I guess their feeling is they'd rather have 2 years of Claypool than 4 years of a rookie that you don't know if they'll be as good as Claypool, who you take with that pick.
Yeah, I haven't done any.
The word is that this year's wide receiver class is not as good as the last couple of years.
Yeah, just I haven't done any research there, but I assume they have because they're a professional front office. So yeah, if you're really down on like the mid-round wide receiver picks, I can understand that. The weirdest part of this is the timing. I just do like the Bears trying something because this offseason they didn't try anything at the wide receiver position. So I do appreciate them making a move to do a thing. The timing just is very weird.
Well, this is when the player was available. Wide receiver, 2nd round, wide receivers that you get for a 2nd rounder were not available in the offseason, except for Amari Cooper, who cost a 5th.
Yeah, well, that's the Cowboys screwed up bad, but I'm starting to think about this from the Pittsburgh point of view, and for everything we said about how the Bears want to see what Justin Fields has and he needs a good young receiver. You could say all that same thing about Kenny Pickett.
No, because they've got Deontay Johnson and they've got George Pickens.
All right.
Yeah, wide receiver is not the problem in Pittsburgh. The problem is Pickett any good?
Well, and Matt Canada is he?
Yeah, and Matt Canada. Yeah.
And then they did not trade him yet, have they?
No.
If they can trade Matt Canada for a 2nd rounder, I would do that right away.
Mark Moon wants to know if the Jaguars are terrible or just bad and unlucky. They are bad and unlucky. The Jaguars have a positive point differential right now at 2-6. Like that is an unlucky team.
And that's definitely true. But there's times it's a cliche and it's overused. But I think there is something to the idea of a team learning how to win.
Yeah,
because I wasn't watching the Denver-Jacksonville game because it was started at 6:30 in Seattle. But I watched. Everyone was playing the interception Lawrence threw at the end of the game. He was desperate, and the DB undercut the route. That was not a terrible interception. It was not good, obviously. But then when I saw his red zone interception where he just threw the ball right to another, I thought, oh, that's no good at all. And obviously that's 3 points they could have used in a very close game.
Here's the interesting thing. Normally, there is no real consistency to players and teams being better in the red zone than they are overall. But this year, I will say the Jaguars are pretty good on the rest of the field. Lawrence specifically is horrible in the red zone. Horrible. His numbers in the red zone are horrible. So like seeing what he's like in the red zone in the second half of the season is an interesting lesson in whether there are players who are consistently worse in the red zone, because theoretically he should be fine in the red zone going forward because numbers show that in the past that there's really no consistency there.
I'm looking at their future schedule. I guess right in the middle of the pack. Where are they? and a little more difficult than average. The 12th overall in future schedule. So, I just felt like looking that up. There's really any discussion about whether they've been unlucky or not. But yeah, it looks like we're still a year away, at least, from the great Jacksonville resurgence. And I also think that his rookie year was so wasted. He's practically still a rookie right now. So a lot of these growing pains are the things you see from rookie quarterbacks all the time. I'm not as confident in Trevor Lawrence rebounding as I was before the season, but I'm not throwing in the towel either.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Jalen Hurts. We were talking about him earlier. He took that big leap between years 2 and year 3. That's still well on the table. I don't like people writing off quarterbacks before they at least have 2 full years under their belt. Once we start seeing that third, my always rule of thumb for evaluating, especially high draft rookie quarterbacks, is in year 1, just focus on the positives, see what they do well. Year 2, look to see some kind of improvement, and I think we have seen improvement in general from Lawrence this season. And then in year 3, they are kind of who they are. Because after year 3, you don't really see those huge jumps anymore.
Unless you're Geno Smith.
Unless you're Geno Smith.
Yeah. Well, it'd be quite a fall from Trevor Lawrence being compared to Andrew Luck to being compared to a Geno Smith. But, you take the comparisons you can get.
So, just before we move on here, for the 49ers Seahawks discussion about who you like better. I mean, both teams are playing very well right now. There's a reason it's neck and neck, but we're talking about Geno Smith's great year. He's currently 5th in DVOA and 6th in DR, and in his entire I can't believe I'm about to say these words, but in his entire Seahawks career, Russell Wilson was only top 6 in both stats one time in that 2015 year. So bizarre. But it's worth noting that one of the quarterbacks above Geno Smith in DVOA and DYAR is Jimmy Garoppolo. So
now, yeah, we talked about how, like, with all the go routes at Philadelphia, like, sometimes you don't need scheme, you just need talent. Jimmy Garoppolo gets help from the scheme just a little tiny bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, but it works.
Everything we know about what past performance teaches us says to favor the 49ers. It's just, there's just this kind of itching, like the Geno Smith, his improvement is probably can't stay this good. Like even if it drops a little bit, like that would be enough for the 49ers to move ahead of them. But the Seahawks are way better than anybody gave them credit for, and so
that's clear.
Yeah. It's also worth noting that if it does end in a tie, the Niners did beat Seattle head-to-head, and they are currently 3-0 in the division. So if the Niners and Seahawks end up with the same record, at the moment it looks. I mean, it's not clinched yet because they do play again, but it does look like the Niners will likely have the tiebreaker.
Right, because even if they play again, even if Seattle wins, the next tiebreaker will be division record, and San Francisco's 3-0 in the division.
Yeah, it's a big game this week for the Seahawks. Division game against the Cardinals. They got to start. If the Niners are going to own the Rams, the Seahawks have to own somebody in order to stay in that divisional race. And a new Call of Duty came out, so
let's see how good Woolen is. If Woolen is that good, let's see him shut down DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, yep. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. All right, back in the AFC then. Another team that I think a lot of us had written off, at least as far as playoff favorites, the Tennessee Titans, and a player a lot of us had written off is Derrick Henry, who appears to be invulnerable.
Yeah.
Derrick Henry has against the Texans, who ran for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, as he always seems to do against the Texans. So he has the most recent 200-yard game of a running game in the NFL. And he has 2 of the last 3 200-yard games. And he has 3 of the last 5 200-yard games. And he has 4 of the last 7, and 5 of the last 9, and 6 of the last 11. He's just alternating 200-yard games with the rest of the league.
Yeah, and like you say here, I like this one. Most games in NFL history with 200 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Derrick Henry has 6. Derrick Henry only against the Houston Texans has 4. And then it's Jim Brown, Barry Sanders, and LaDainian Tomlinson with 3 apiece. That is fantastic.
Yes. When you talked about the Niners owning the Rams, Derrick Henry owns the Texans. And I get the Texans are really bad, which is why Henry's DVOA and DYIR was not super great this week. But, he may have 200 yards. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
I don't care how bad your defense is. You don't let that up. Let those kind of numbers go very easily.
Oh God, the defensive adjustment for Henry this week is crazy.
Yeah.
It went from like 75 to 15 DYARs just on opponent adjustment.
The Houston Texans, as of right now, have the new worst run defense DVOA we have ever measured. Washington, at I think 96, had an 18 point something percent, and Houston's coming at 19 point something. So, hey, a historic season for the Houston Texans, as they can't tackle anybody, and especially not Derrick Henry.
This has been every year. Every year, Houston ranks among the worst run defenses ever.
And they tried. They tried to stop Henry. They loaded the box again and again and again because the Titans had Malik Willis in there. They knew the Titans weren't going to throw. The Titans knew the Titans weren't going to throw. They put everybody on the line, and Derrick Henry still gained 118 yards on 18 carries against stacked boxes. That's per Next Gen Stats, and it's the most by any player in any game since Derrick Henry in Week 9 of 2020 against the Houston Texans. I don't know what you do to stop him.
Yeah, so, you don't be the Houston Texans. That's
the Texans have been trying that for years.
As you know here, Brian, Derrick Henry is now the Tennessee Titans / Houston Oilers franchise leader in rushing touchdowns. It's kind of amazing how some teams just have identities throughout the years, and the Oilers / Titans going from Earl Campbell to Eddie George to Derrick Henry. Like they always have a guy who will just run your ass over.
Yeah, the only time they didn't was when they had a guy who would just run past you, which was Chris Johnson.
Yeah. There's a sneaky contender for if you want to look at the best position units, like the Titans Oilers franchise, best running backs in NFL history. They're not someone who would jump to mind immediately, but
Cleveland is the other one that jumps to mind immediately because of Jim Brown and Leroy Moore. And then Nick Chubb.
Yeah, but there's a sizable gap in there. The Titans and Oilers have seemed to have someone pretty consistently as long as I've been watching football.
Useful title points out that the Oilers, even Gary Brown during the run and shoot days, was a tough runner.
Yeah. And Lorenzo White then too, and they were passing more than anybody else. But when they ran, they could do it.
The Titans are just 19th in DVOA, so we acknowledge they're a mediocre team. But they're in the AFC.
But they were a mediocre team last year, and they still got the 1 seed. And,
and lost.
Well, they did, but I mean, they're not that talented compared to the rest of the league, but they keep winning football games, and
every year they do this.
Mike Vrabel is really, really good at coaching football.
I think he is.
And I know that's hardly breaking news here, but probably doesn't get enough credit for what he's done here. All right.
I've got one question here, another question from a reader. Bill Houston says, what trade needs to happen?
I don't think the Bills need a running back.
No, the one is made sense to me, even though I don't think running backs are as important as most people think, is Kareem Hunt to the Rams.
I saw the Rams. I forget who they're in on.
Brian Burns for a 2024 and 2025 first round pick is what they offered the Panthers for Brian Burns. That's all they have. They don't have any more draft picks to trade for anybody. No, they're offering draft picks 3 years into the future. And what I had said that, if Carolina gets 2 first round picks or Burns, they should take it. That was assuming there were 2 first round picks, like in the lifespan of the next head coach, or that's going to be. You could say, we're trading away your best pass rusher, but in 3 years you get a first round pick, and it's going to be fine. The Rams have maxed their line of credit. They don't have anyone.
They just keep pushing it forward, and I forget where I saw, but somebody pointed out the last first round pick they used was Jared Goff, and they've decided to never draft a first round player ever again.
The other thought might be Brandin Cooks to the Ravens.
Yes, that would be a good
Rashad Bateman.
That would be huge. I keep writing about something like 5 or 6 times this year. Lamar Jackson has been the top passer on throws to tight ends because he has no receivers. He has to throw to his tight ends, and Mark Andrews is awesome, of course. But yes, that is the most obvious trade that needs to happen. The Ravens need to trade for a wide receiver, be it Brandin Cooks or whoever else might be available, and that would make a lot of sense.
It should be noted that Brandin Cooks is not at practice today. That could be a veteran day. That could be a health thing. But also could be don't get the guy hurt as trade deadlines is happening.
Yep.
So nothing. There's smoke there. There's no fire at this point. No one's reporting anything's in the works here. But he's not at practice today. So stay tuned, I guess, on that one.
Someone said earlier in the comments about Jeff Wilson being valuable to somebody. I think Jeff Wilson is the perfect example of why we say that running backs don't matter. I think Jeff Wilson is a guy who was an undrafted free agent who was probably made by the Shanahan scheme, and I wouldn't want to take a chance on him if I was another team.
Not for anything of significant value. I mean,
not for anything of significant value.
If someone wants to throw a 6th or 7th round pick after him, I think that makes total sense. Just the problem is the team that wants him the most are the Rams, and the Niners are not going to trade Jeff Wilson to the Rams.
Right. All right, a few other fun stuff from around the league last weekend. The Falcons and Panthers had a very, very crazy game with DJ Moore catching not quite a Hail Mary because there was still 12 seconds left and it was all alone in the end zone. It was a go route where he beat double coverage. But he gets the touchdown pass. It travels 67.6 yards in the air, longest completion by air distance in the next gen stats era since 2016. And then all hell breaks loose.
Watching that, I mean, this was for first place in the NFC South between the Falcons and Panthers. Watching the ending 20 minutes out of the game was nuts. PJ Walker before this week I believe was dead last in air yards per attempt. Like, he doesn't have this kind of arm.
Yeah.
And then he just decided, oh, I'm going to throw the longest touchdown pass in the past, a half decade. Sure.
He had a game a week or two ago where his average depth of target was negative.
Yeah.
It's
not this
only
week.
I mean, even in the XFL, he was not that kind of. He wasn't kind of the running and gunning kind of play. He obviously threw deeper because the opponents weren't as good. But this is not. If you had to list all the starting quarterbacks from last week, you told me someone was going to throw a 68-yard touchdown pass. Walker would have been, if maybe not last, he would have been the bottom 2 or 3 there. And of course, that was the game-winning, touchdown. Except
he got excited. He took his helmet off, which per the letter of the NFL rule is a 15-yard penalty. That pushes the game-winning extra point attempt back to, I think it was the equivalent of a 48-yard field goal.
Yes.
And Eddy Piñeiro misses that. We go to overtime. The Panthers intercept Marcus Mariota. They send Eddy Piñeiro out to win it. He misses again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I would point out, by the way, that field goal he missed in overtime was from a shorter distance than the regular extra point would be.
Over the last 20 seasons, there have been 2 instances of a kicker in the same game missing a potential go-ahead extra point in the last 30 seconds and a potential game-winning field goal in overtime, and they both happened this year. The Panthers on Sunday, and then McPherson in the Bengals back in week 1. And at least McPherson had the excuse that his long snapper is hurt, and he had the backup long snapper, so the whole system was broken down. Eddy Piñeiro does not have that excuse.
Yeah.
I will say, I want to bring one up point. You said that by the letter of the law, Moore taking off his helmet was a 15-yard penalty. That's actually not 100% true, because if we're going by the letter of the rule, taking your helmet off on the field is a 15-yard penalty. Moore had run out of the back of the end zone, was basically in the stands at that point in time. That is technically, by the letter of the law, not a penalty anymore. So there is an argument by some extra refs and I can't remember which network's officiating, but one of them, I think it was CBS's, said that shouldn't have been a penalty. So that should not have been moved back to 15 yards.
It was some ticky-tack garbage.
It shouldn't be a penalty anyway. Exactly. Like, he just celebrated catching a game-winning touchdown? How dare he?
We should be talking about this amazing highlight reel play, this amazing athletic achievement. It's a sport. We want to watch athletes doing things. And instead, we are unfortunately talking about an officiating mistake or we're not talking about what we should be talking about. And that's unfortunate.
Heaven forbid we celebrate doing a good thing.
Yes. Don't you dare be happy. Don't have fun out there in this game we're playing. The Miami Dolphins are also playing games and winning a lot of them, and they are doing it through the air. And we've talked about the quarterback a lot, and especially the health of their quarterback, but their wide receivers are dominant.
Yeah. Through 8 games, Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle have combined for 1,688 combined receiving yards. That's the most for any duo through 8 games in NFL history. And this is with down to third string quarterbacks at point in times because of concussions. This is with a random selection of passers, and Hill and Waddle just keep producing at rates we have never seen before. Hill's had a very weird season. He's at 160 plus receiving yards in each even numbered week, and in each odd numbered week, he's had fewer than 100 receiving yards. So at least he's consistent.
He's the Brett Saberhagen of receivers.
There you go.
I like that one. That's a good one. Yeah, they are currently second and third in DYAR. I said that here. Waddle's second in DVOA. Hill's a little lower at 13th. But yeah, at some point, I think there's a quick reads column there about great wide receiver duos. I think it's been done before. There's been 2 or 3 teams, like the Randy Moss Vikings, I think, were first and second in DYAR. But it's not common. It's definitely not common. Trevor Lawrence, we have already discussed today, but we got to talk about whether it's terrible or unlucky. Either way, we can say so far it has not worked out.
Yeah, so far Lawrence, he's now started 25 games. He's 5-20, and I know wins and losses are not a quarterback stat, but they get credit to them because they are the most visible player. And 5-20 is the worst record for a number 1 picked quarterback since the common draft began in 1967. So we're talking about only a handful of guys, but all those handful of guys, even the all-time busts like Jamarcus Russell, even the all-time busts have done better than Lawrence to this point in time.
Did Jamarcus Russell start 25 games?
That's actually a very good question. I think the answer to that is no. I think that's actually why he didn't pop up in that search.
Yeah. And then real quick before we go, a little note here on the Cleveland Browns, who it turns out are not dead.
Jamarcus Russell quickly started exactly 25 games. He went 7-18.
Okay, he was better. All right, there you go.
And yeah, Browns with 5 straight wins against the Bengals, which is their first 5-game winning streak against any opponent since they rejoined the league in 1999.
I thought the Browns might be the Bengals. I had them picked as a minor upset this week. I did not expect the Browns to blow out the Bengals.
Whip ass. That was incredible.
They, after the last 2 weeks, we're like, oh well, the narrative that the Bengals were washed maybe a bit premature, and now the narrative of the Bengals might have been washed was too premature because the Bengals looked terrible. Oh. I know they were missing they were missing Chase, but
yes,
it shouldn't make that big of a difference. One player should not make you look that bad.
I was watching the Manning cast, and Peyton Manning was so hideously bored of that game, begging teams to run, begging Eli at the end to shut up so they could say goodbye. Exasperated, bored Peyton Manning may be my new favorite Peyton Manning. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this week. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for joining the chat and asking your questions. And I do want to one more time say thank you to our friends at Underdog Fantasy, because you can play on Underdog Fantasy with us and double your first deposit up to $100 with promo code OUTSIDERS. Are your season-long fantasy teams floundering? Play Underdog's Battle Royale, a fast 6-round weekly fantasy football draft with easier chances to win the traditional daily fantasy sports sites. You can even win $50,000 if you grab first place. Or try their pick'em games where you can easily pick players' chances to go higher or lower than their projected stat lines, even in states where traditional prop betting currently isn't available. Underdog is the fastest growing fantasy site around. Join the fun over at underdogfantasy.com or download Underdog in the App Store and use promo code OUTSIDERS now to double your first deposit up to $100. So thank you again to Underdog Fantasy. Thank you, all the listeners. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Brian. That was fun. Let's do it all again next week.
Sounds good.